Welcome to H-Frame, the only comprehensive, entirely unofficial guide to vintage Black & Decker Workmates. The website is hframe with a hyphen .weebly.com, where you'll find my in-depth documentation, over 60 web pages, over 100 PDF documents, over 500 photographs, and still growing. The subject of this video is a pair of Workmates, the 79-001 Type 3 and Type 5, which were made in Ireland and imported to the US in very small numbers in the late 1970s. Production of the Black & Decker Workmate for North America began in 1974 with the model 79-001, which continued through 1982 in 10 versions, designated by Black & Decker as types E through 9. My website and my other videos have extensive background info about all of the early Workmates. The blue color of the 79-001 Type 3 and Type 5 that you're looking at should clue you in to the special status they have in the 79-001 lineup. As I just mentioned, unlike most of the 79-001s, the Type 3 and Type 5 were made not in Brockville, Ontario, as the rest of them were, but in Black & Decker's factory in Kildare, Ireland. Although their operation is basically identical to the Canadian-made 79-001s, they don't share a single part with them. To identify a Type 3, 79001 Type 3, which you see on the left here, look for the blue paint, the aluminum H-frames, and the 4-rib front footrest with all of the ribs running the length of the footrest. That is side to side as we look at it. The combination of these three features on a 79-001 uniquely identifies it as a Type 3. Based on my extensive research, I estimate that about 2% of all 79-001s are Type 3s, making it one of the most rare Workmates. For the 79-001 Type 5, on the right here, look for the blue paint, the aluminum H-frames, and the 4-rib footrest with an additional center section of ribs running front to back. The combination of these three features on a 79-001 uniquely identifies it as a Type 5. The Type 5 is by far the rarest 79-001. My estimate is that less than 0.5% of all 79-001s are Type 5s. In years of documenting 79-001s, I've found only a handful of confirmed 79-001 Type 5s. Now, I have to tell you, if you were in the UK, you would find that the WM625, which is what these were when they were built in Ireland, is quite easy to find nowadays, the vintage ones. So although these are very rare as 79-001 imports in the US, they are pretty common under their original model number in the UK. The 79-001 Type 3 was built in the UK, sold there as the model WM625 Type E02. The 79-001 Type 5 was also built in the UK and is nearly identical to a slightly later UK model, the WM625 Type E04. This makes the Type 3 and Type 5 very similar to each other, which is why I have them together for this video. You can probably see immediately the huge difference in condition between these two, and it'll probably become more apparent as I show you the close-ups in a moment. So let me tell you how I acquired each of them. I found the Type 3 on Craigslist for $75. I drove about 100 miles to get it. The seller had owned it for about 8 years after inheriting it from his uncle, who was the original owner. His uncle had been in the TV repair business and had used the Workmate only indoors as a stand for working on electronics, so it was in terrific condition. The seller somewhat apologetically told me at one point that the price was quite firm. Meanwhile, bargaining was the furthest thing from my mind. It took me 4 more years of searching online all over the country to find a Type 5. I came across it on Facebook Marketplace from a seller 700 miles away in New Jersey. They had acquired it when they bought a house and found the Workmate left behind in the basement. It looked seriously neglected in the photos, and one of the vice handles was broken off, but I could see enough of the components on it that I was sure it had to be a Type 5. I offered to pay for packing and shipping by UPS, plus a little extra for the seller's trouble. The seller was extremely agreeable and it all worked out, but cost me close to $200. When it arrived, cosmetically, it was in just as bad condition as it looked in the photos. But all parts were present, there was no hidden damage, and it all functioned properly. I found an original vice handle on eBay that cost me $75, including more than half of that cost for shipping from the UK. I put in many hours removing rust from every single steel part, oxidation from every aluminum one, and paint spills and overspray from the wooden jaws and the H-frames. Since the Type 5 is so rare, I decided to keep this one as original as possible, which meant not repainting it. The only thing I did other than the cleanup was to reapply the black lettering on the H-frames. Let's look at the Type 3 first. The 79001 Type 3 was sold in the US for a short time during North American production of the 79001 Type 2. I will concentrate here on how it differs from the Type 2. However, overall, it is similar enough to the Type 2 that Black & Decker used the same owner's manual for both the Type 2 and the Type 3. To relabel the WM625 as a 79001 for the US market, they used the same style of jaw label as they did on the Type 2. In addition, the US model and type number are stamped in ink on the bottom surface of the jaw. My label on this Type 3 started coming loose and curling up recently, so at the moment I have a piece of clear plastic sitting here to hold it down for this video. Interestingly, you can also find the UK model number WM625E02 stamped into the steel on the rear edge of the footrest. Hope you can read that here. It depends a lot on the exact lighting you get on it. So as I mentioned already, the standout visual feature of the Type 3 is the blue paint on all of the steel frame pieces. A few years later, in 1982, there was another US-made Workmate with a blue frame, the Workmate 400 or 79034, but it doesn't have the aluminum H-frames. All Workmates for the UK had blue frames up until about 1986. The jaws for the Type 3 have 10 peg holes, just like the Type E and the Type 1. That's one more than the 9 holes found in the jaws of the Type 2. These on the Type 3 are the Workmate standard 20 millimeter diameter. The jaws on the Type 3 are attached from below through solid aluminum mounting blocks, somewhat similar to the Type 1. The 2 mounting bolt holes at each end of each jaw are about 5/8 of an inch in diameter, with an embedded nylon insert, a threaded insert, instead of the steel insert used on the Type 1. The H-frames are installed in reverse orientation from the way they are on the Canadian-made 79001s. The Workmate sides face outward, while the Black & Decker sides face inward. So whichever side you look at it from, you see the Workmate side closest to you, with the Black & Decker side of the other H-frame lurking behind it. The Type 3 has the first single layer jaws used on a 79001. The material is a slightly thicker plywood than the earlier ones, but it doesn't have the double layer at the edge where the jaws meet. The North American made 79001s would eventually switch to the single layer jaws with the Type 6 in 1978. You can also see underneath here the solid aluminum mounting blocks for the jaws that I mentioned earlier. The vice handle arms have the cast-in B and D logo from the Type E. The top release levers use a torsion spring rather than the coil spring used on the Canadian-made 79001s. You could see, I hope, that one end of the torsion spring presses against the upper frame. The other end presses against the end of the top release lever. That part of the lever has a little bump on it that is supposed to keep the end of the spring in place, but sometimes the end of the spring would slip off of the lever anyway. I'm going to move on to the Type 5 before coming back to the Type 3. Practically everything I showed you about the Type 3 also applies to the Type 5. So for the Type 5, I'll focus only on the characteristics that make it different. The sales period for the Type 5, supplementing sales of the Type 4, was some part of 1977. The most visible difference between the Type 5 and the Type 3 is the footrest or step, which on the Type 5 has a central section with short cross ribs running front to back. It's a little hard to see here with all the extra black paint on it, but I think you can see what I'm talking about. On the other hand, the most significant but not visible characteristic of the Type 5 is its light weight due to a thinner gauge of steel. It weighs a little more than 27 pounds, 4 pounds less than the Type 3. This makes it 3 to 6 pounds lighter than all other 79001s except the all aluminum Type E. You have to have a pretty good eye to find the other minor differences. The mounting holes near the ends of each jaw are smaller on the Type 5 than on the Type 3. Only what are they here? They're about a 1/4 inch in diameter, and that's because they no longer have nylon inserts embedded in them like the ones on the Type 3 here. Instead, on the Type 5, the plywood itself is threaded to accept the bolts that attach the jaws from below. The 8 bushings that are installed at the pivot points of the H frames are a bright blue nylon rather than the metal ones used on the Type 3. If you remember the torsion spring I just showed you on the Type 3, well, this was modified in shape. Let's see if I can get it here, with a small bend added at the end that presses on the lever. That bend is captured in a newly added slot in the lever. This arrangement does a much better job of holding the spring securely to the lever than what was found on the Type 3. And one additional thing I want to show you here, unique to my Type 5, which has the bonus of some historical markings. Here you see an inventory tag from the Energy Laboratory of Public Service Electric and Gas, which is New Jersey's largest provider of electric and gas service. So I suspect it lived its time in the service of the electric and gas company. It also has writing on the front edge of the front vice jaw. This part of it says Mech Div, which I suspect probably means mechanical division. And then as you go across, I think I can read the word solar here. And then after that, it becomes pretty indistinct. I can't tell what the rest of it says. With the Type 3 upside down, you can see the model and the type number stamped on the bottom of the wooden jaws. The format of this marking is mostly consistent with the stamps used on the 79001s made in Brockville. So I'm pretty sure the stamp on the Type 3 was applied after these Irish imports arrived in North America. All 8 feet on both the Type 3 and Type 5 are screw-in adjustable, with the 79001's third different style of cone-shaped pads. The threads are metric, like the Type E. On the Type 3 that you're looking at, you can see that the shaft of the adjustable foot has grooves or splines running along its length. The Type 5 is different. On it, the shaft of the foot is smooth. The spring steel catches that latch the folding legs on the Type 3 and the Type 5 are shaped differently and operate slightly differently from the Type 1 and Type 2. The part of the leg that engages with the catch now slides down the inner side of the catch and latches there instead of sliding over and latching on the outer side of the catch. This proved to be less prone to damage than the earlier design, where it could be fairly easy to crush the entire spring catch if there was too much friction on it and you were too rough on it. On the Type 3 and Type 5, there is another difference that's kind of tricky to show you. There's a difference in the upper portion of the legs, where on the Type 5, the legs don't splay outward as far as on the Type 3 when unfolded. So on the Type 5, the legs are slightly more upright. Its footprint is reduced by about 1 inch in each dimension, and it's about 3/8 inch taller overall than the Type 3. So right now I'm showing you the inner part of the foot or the leg when it's folded. If you get an idea of what that structure looks like. Come over here and show the same thing on the Type 5. You can see it's built differently. And if we look at it from the side, here on the Type 3, you can see there are two surfaces that are at an angle, that forms an angle at the top of the leg. On the Type 5, that edge goes pretty much down straight without making the turn that the other one did. On the bottom surface of the jaw, you can see the ink stamp that indicates the model and type number. On the Type 5, it says WM79001 E05, made in Republic of Ireland. The format of this marking tells me that it was stamped at the factory in Ireland, unlike the ink stamp on the Type 3, which I believe was applied in Brockville. That is because neither the WM prefix nor the E prefix was ever used anywhere else in reference to the 79001, but both of those were a normal part of the designations in the UK, with this one actually matching quite closely the markings on the WM625 as it was sold in the UK. So that is it for my examination of the 79001 Type 3 and 5. You can find much more about these and all of the early Workmates at my website, hframe.weebly.com, including owner's manuals, part diagrams, catalog and newspaper appearances, as well as discoveries I have made that are not documented anywhere else. Thanks for watching.